when the topic comes up then of how do I get them to engage, right, you've got to start off by telling a story. Too often people start off and they're like, I'm a security expert, not to pick on you, and I've been working on this field and I've done all this stuff, and it's like, okay, great, but like, why don't you just start by telling the story of maybe like the last security breach you had, as long as your company will let you, right? Or you don't have to even, you can get it approved, but it can even be a story about how you got into security, right? But bring it to a human level. And too often I see these talks where I actually want to leave, where they just like go off and start talking about the code and the details and like all this stuff, and you're just like, oh my god, I feel like in my freshman lecture again. And like, I want to be in bed, right? So you got to bring it back to, hey, this is who I am, this is kind of the problem I had, or this is where I started, and really humanize it. Then you can lead into all the technical stuff, right? Don't discount the technical stuff. We're all here to be technical. But start by telling a story and getting them to connect with you. And 99% of the time, it doesn't even matter what you say. It doesn't matter if you fumble afterwards, right? Because they've connected with you. That's why they're coming out to conferences. That's why they want to come out and speak. Otherwise, they would be all sitting at home, reading books or watching, TED Talks. So realize that they're coming out to connect with you as a person. They want to hear your stories. They want to hear your perspective and your unique experiences. So ultimately, they want to be able to form a connection with you. The best way to do that is by starting with a story. And the other thing I'll say is, a lot of times when you're structuring a talk, you've probably heard this, like the best teachers, the reason they're so good is because they start off by telling you what they're going to teach you, or if they're a speaker, what they're going to be talking about. Then they actually talk about it, and then they wrap up and they tell you again what they've just told you, right? So signposting is really important to keep people engaged in the conversation or in your particular talk. And too often people start and then they kind of just like are all over the place, and you're like, what are they talking about now? Did they say they were going to cover this? Maybe am I in the right talk here? It just doesn't make sense. So be very careful about taking the time to signpost. It's totally okay, right? People do this in books. We have table of contents. We have section headings. Same thing needs to happen when you're doing a talk, isn't it? And then once you've been going through the talk, right, you have to bring it all back together. And this is where the best speakers shine. They bring it all back together. They give those action items or what the strategies are to the audience. So it's not enough to go off on all these tangents and be like, great, I talked about a lot of stuff. You've got to wrap it all back into what was the purpose of the talk. Now, a lot of times people ask me, how do I make the visual design? What do I put in the slides, and how many words should be on it, and what should I present? And I'm sure you've all snoozed through those talks where people just read from their slides, right? So if you don't want to be that person, I highly recommend reading Presentation Zen, or this lovely book here that Susan's brought, which is also on design. And I actually read this right before I did my TED Talk, and I thought it was great for a couple reasons. First is, I'm not a designer, and that means I don't design stuff very well. But what I learned from this book actually helped me design better slides. And the first thing I learned was no more than 3 to 5 words per slide. And what that meant was I had to be really polished in my delivery, right? Because I can't be up there reading the slides. But it lets me connect with the audience better. Second, full bleed images. Right? Even if it's stock photography, that's really important. An image that captures what it is that you're going to say and has an emotional effect on the audience. Right? So that was the second thing I learned. And then the third was being really clear, if you are going to present data, like charts, etc., that it makes sense, right? There's not too many charts in there, there's not too many graphs, but it's easy to look at it and then immediately go back to the speaker. But the key takeaway overall was slides, just a simple addition, right? You shouldn't have to give a talk where you rely so heavily on your slides that you're nervous without them, right? It's kind of like note cards. Nobody likes to sit there and watch people go through note cards or read through a script, right? Slides are the same way. They're just there to be a visual attention getter, but ultimately you want to come back and connect with the speaker. So you don't want to have slides that are too busy. Hopefully I've done a good job of representing that in these. So let's talk about a more, dicier topic that I'm sure a number of you here to talk about. I saved this for last because I know that after saying all the things that I've said, you're still going to be like, that was great, Poornima, like really helpful. I can submit a proposal, but then what am I going to do when I get on that stage, right? So here's the thing. Everybody gets stage fright. I had stage fright about a month ago, right before I did my TED Talk. I had practiced a lot. I still got up there, and as I was walking, like my knees were shaking. And you know, if for those of you who might have seen the TED Talk, you're like, oh, you didn't seem nervous. I was like, oh my God, I was so nervous. Like those 12 minutes, I was like, when is this going to be over? When is it going to be over? And I had to like shut up and just deliver the talk, right? So it happens no matter what. And the thing about it, though, is you can still come off pretty confidently despite having it. And the key is, you've probably heard this over and over again, right? You got to prepare, you got to practice, you got to be poised. Okay, that's platitudes. How do we do this? So the prep, we've talked about this already, right? It's sitting down and coming up with a format for your talk, right? What are you going to talk about? What are the takeaways? What's the format going to be? Running it past some people, right? So as long as you do that level of preparation, figuring out who your audience is, what they might be interested in, what level they're at, that will help. It will actually help, right? Because if you do a good job of filtering the audience, you won't get those hecklers that then make you feel nervous, right? So that's another reason it's important to filter. The second, you know, when I say practice, I don't mean stand there in front of a mirror and like every day churn through it. That is not a good way to practice. At the end of the day, you're actually practicing incorrectly. When I say practice, you know, you want to go through that first run through on your own, but then you want to practice with a peer, right? You want to practice with somebody. And oftentimes, it's actually good to practice with somebody you know really well, because like 90% of the time, you actually get a little bit nervous in presenting in front of them a topic. So I always say, you know, pick your best friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whomever, and speak in front of them. Next level of practice, right? Practice in front of a group that has no friggin' idea what it is that you're talking about. Because what they're going to be able to do is they're going to be able to sit there and say, yeah, you do this too much, right? Or you're like standing here like this a lot, or you're like this, right? That's important too, right? You need that kind of feedback. Or they're going to say, yeah, that story in the beginning, oh, that was like so wonderful. And I didn't know what the hell you talked about afterwards, but I love that story, right? And that's like my mom in the audience. So you gotta give those moms, not everybody's mom, but my mom at least, right? You gotta give them something to look forward to. So, you know, having somebody that doesn't know what you're talking about, and then bring in the experts at the very end. Like, you know, a week before you're about to get on stage, to then nitpick, just in case your audience does contain some of those people who might think they were beginners, but really they were intermediate, or they thought they were intermediate, but really they're beginners, right? So whatever it is. And then have them kind of go through it and go through the slides and all of that. But that's kind of the level of practice that you need to do. It's not just you practicing all by yourself. Now, when I talk about poise, right, I know people are like, well, I don't know, like, what does that mean? So the best way to correct for poise is actually to record yourself. I learned this trick back in high school when we actually had to like buy one of those cameras in my speech department. Now we all have webcams, so we have no excuse why we shouldn't be recording ourselves. But this is actually your best friend, because when you record yourself, you can actually get some instant feedback, right? You see the gestures you're making, and you're like, what? Why does my face look like that, right? Or you're like, oh, I should really not wear that outfit. You know, whatever it is, you'll get it out by recording yourself and then watching it. So I encourage you to do this. And the other reason is because nowadays a lot of our talks are actually recorded, right? So we want to kind of be cognizant of how we come across even in a recording. And so starting off by recording yourself is helpful. And then also tracking that progress. Like if you want, record yourself in the beginning, right when you're getting started, and then see how well you've done. That's also a really useful feedback mechanism. Because too often we're like, oh, I still suck, but you don't see the progress. That's why it's important to record. So let's switch gears, and for those of you who may be a little bit advanced, right, I always get asked this question, like, how do I get paid? How do I get paid to speak, right? I want to be able to make some money. And the truth is, one, you can get paid to speak, and two, you can actually get paid a lot. I, last year, did a lot of speaking engagements and got paid close to 5 figures. I have to, like, write a New York Times bestseller or something like that before I get into the 6-figure category. But, you know, it is a great way, it's a great opportunity. Now, if this is something that you haven't been speaking a lot, the first thing you're going to want to do is build up a portfolio. And by that I mean get at least 3 to 5 talks under your belt. One at a fairly major conference, but it doesn't have to be huge, right? It could even be like, oh, I spoke at Berkeley, or I spoke at Stanford, or I spoke at Dreamforce, right? So get something big on your portfolio, and then if that's a little bit of a challenge, start with unconferences. When I first moved to the Valley, right, I was 2 years out of college, no one was going to bring me on to speak because I looked like I was 16. So what I ended up doing was I ended up speaking at code camps. And it was great because people were like, oh, we're so desperate for people to come speak. Oh, you're a woman? That's even better. Oh, you're young? Okay, sure. Right? So it's all these good things. So I started off by speaking at unconferences, and I really just did that for a few years until I could build up a portfolio enough of speaking engagements that I could then say, hey, I think I deserve to be paid. The other is, if before you decide to ask for a pay, right, people are always a little bit nervous. They're like, oh, I don't know if like she's worth the money. So what I recommend is having one of your talks be recorded. And that either means if you go to a place, ask them if there's going to be a recording produced, or hire a videographer. If you'd like, I'll introduce you to Mika in the back, right? It's pretty affordable, and it's a great opportunity for you to get something produced and for people to then see it, right? A lot of times people want to see samples. Even for my TED Talk, they were like, send us 3 to 4 samples of videos because that's the only way we're going to know whether you're good enough. Now, when it comes to actually, getting paid, it's really just about asking, right? So last year, I was a panel I was sitting on, and I kind of set this goal of like, I need to start asking to get paid because I think I'm doing a good job, and I know that these conferences are making money off of me, and so I want to, make a little bit of that. I'm bootstrapping my business. So the first one of the year, I was just like, if you could pay, it was a panel, and I was like, I don't know if they pay for panelists because I'm just like there sitting with 4 people, but I was like, no, I set this goal. I'm just gonna ask. So I asked the organizer. I was like, can you pay me $75? And I was thinking, that's like $75 an hour, right? And he was like, okay, done. And then it's like, oh, maybe I should ask for more, right? But it was fine. Got my feet wet, asked for the $75, and then kind of doubled my rates after that, right? So it was easier to do as I started to do it. Now, there are some points where it gets tricky, right? Sometimes conference organizers will say, well, we're really not paying any of our speakers. So that's why I say it doesn't hurt to ask. But then you can say, hey, do you provide something else? Especially if it's something you have to travel to, right? Always ask for travel assistance. Even if they don't provide it, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? But I always make it a point to say, hey, can you get me a hotel room? Can you pay for my ticket? A plane ticket. Usually they can pay for a hotel room because they just reserve blocks in a conference, and they always do this for speakers, especially those who are the technical or big names. So don't feel like you can't ask for it, because it's just really going to go to waste. Sometimes with travel, they will ask you, hey, we'll need to reimburse this, or they'll set a cap, and they'll be like, you can't fly first class, and you're like, that's okay, because I'm not Bill Clinton, so it's not a big deal. But it doesn't hurt to ask for those kinds of things. So if they can't pay, then ask for other stuff, even things like reimbursements for food and lodging or a taxi out, right? All those things end up adding up. So make it a point to do that. Now, for those of you out there who, if you decide that you want to get paid, I'm not going to dig into this today, but it's important to have a speaker contract. And if you're getting ready to speak, contact me. I'll send over my template, right? Because I go through all this stuff. I say, this is the rate. This is what you're going to be able to do with my material. These are the kind of things that you need to provide, like the lodging, airfare, etc. And I just list all of that. But it comes off as you being really professional. I know sometimes people ask, should I go join a bureau and pay like $500 a year? I have never done that. I've also talked to a number of people who have done that, and they've said, maybe they've got 1 to 2 speaking engagements a year through that. So it doesn't seem like they're generating a lot of gigs for you. So you might just be better off either contacting a conference organizer if it's one that you know you're already going to go to or that you think is interesting, or go to your website, hopefully you have one, and just put up a tab that says speaking engagements, right? And even if you don't have any yet, right, this is kind of like a resume where you can say, this is what I would like to speak about, right? And then you can list whatever the topics are, right? Or you can even list the previous ones that you've done. But it at least gives people a sense of, hey, this person's interested in speaking. So super simple way of getting started. All right, so like I said, I was going to signpost. So first start off by telling you why you should speak at conferences, right? If for nothing else, so we can hang out in the bathrooms and have some banter together. But really, it's because it's going to open up a lot of opportunities. I know you might not believe me right now, but a number of women that I've seen, and even men, who have gone out and done speaking engagements, immediately people come up to them and say, hey, really like to bring you in to consult. Now the key is you've got to follow up and ask them for money, right? And that's how you get the gig, or you're like, okay, we're going to set up this interview or whatnot. So it's still up to you to follow up, but it's a great way to open some doors for yourself. The second is, how do I come up with topics, right? What should I actually be talking about? Start with something simple, whatever you're currently working on, right? You might have to ask your company if it's okay to talk about it. You might have to have them run through the slide deck, but it's totally fine to start there, and you actually do them a favor by representing that company, helping them recruit and things like that. And then we talked about submitting a proposal, right? When you submit it, you really want to think about the summary statement, the takeaways, as well as what the format's going to be and the audience level, and just being as clear as possible about who it's for and what they're going to get out of it. And then we talked about how do you structure a talk, right? Whether it should be high level, low level. It's really about balance. So it's fine to be high level and motivational, but at the end of the day, you want people to walk away and be able to do something, or at least to be able to take action. And then when we talked about engaging an audience, right? Starting with telling a simple story. It can be silly, it can be funny, it can be dramatic, whatever it is, have your personality shine through it, and don't be afraid of that, right? Too often we're like, oh, what are they gonna think if I tell them the story of like how I was writing code when I was in my diapers, right? That's interesting, right? Everybody wants to hear those kinds of, I wasn't, but I'm just saying somebody out there might be, right? And then when we talked about stage fright, it's gonna happen, but some ways to kind of quell it are doing the preparation ahead of time, right? Even filtering that audience. And then practicing, but not on your own, but with some peers and some other people. Like a lot of times, people also want to speak. I can remember the times when I said I wanted to speak, and I would like walk downstairs to my neighbors. And I'd be like, "Hey, you guys are just like sitting here drinking beer, watching soccer. Like, you got 5 minutes?" And they're like, "Yeah, commercial time. Do your thing." So it was cool, you know. And they gave me a lot of feedback. Like one of the guys actually worked at Google, so he was like, "This is cool." The other guy was a soccer coach. He was like, "Love that story. Didn't understand the rest of the stuff." Right? Mixed audience. It was good. So it was helpful to get that kind of variety, right? So don't feel shy about asking your friends or your colleagues or even your boss to sit down with you and run through that talk. But ultimately, you know, also think about recording yourself so that you see how you speak. That's what's important at the end of the day. And then getting paid to speak, it's as simple as asking, but you need to build up a little bit of a portfolio so that people take you in terms of being credible. Even if you don't have a portfolio and you have like a super like expertise level, like you're a security expert, a lot of times you can still get paid to speak because there's nobody else in the field that's doing your kind of work. So even if you don't have that portfolio, people are bringing you in because you're essentially consulting, you're educating them, right? The easiest times to get speak are often when you do a workshop because they feel like you're teaching people, you're investing a lot of your time into it. Even though you're still doing that for a talk, a lot of times organizers don't get that, but in a workshop, they almost get it 100%. So sometimes it's also the format of the talk that matters.